I think it's pretty safe to say by this point that without any shadow of a doubt, the 200 series Toyota LandCruiser is one that's going to go down in the history books as being one of the best 4x4s of all time. Designed from the ground up to last for 25 years where the average car is only built to survive 8, this thing is truly, as Toyota Australia brands it, the king off the road. Now in Australia at least, the LandCruiser name is one that's incredibly diverse, owing to its immense popularity with over 1 million having sold here, more than anywhere else on Earth. If you're after a smaller LandCruiser, although not one that small, you can have a LandCruiser Prado. If you're after an older one, you can have that too, with one of the various and equally legendary 70 series utes or wagons that have been on sale here since the mid-80s. And even if you want a more luxurious and much uglier LandCruiser, you can have that too, with the 200 series based Lexus LX. Here's some old footage of me driving one on a beach in an exuberant manner, but it's the regular Toyota badged 200 series you see here that's the focus today. First introduced for the 2008 model year, it's now on its second facelift and has been considerably modernised to keep up with the times. If you're in other key 200 series markets like the US or UAE, you'll know these as being rather lavishly equipped, and indeed here in Australia, the leather-lined VX and Sahara models certainly see a lot of popularity despite their high price tags, although it's the slightly more pared-back GXL model that bolsters the majority of Aussie sales. The only big change between the 200 series in countries with cheaper petrol and those sold here in diesel-doting Australia is that the petrol V8 was cut from all variants bar the Lexus LX 570 for the 2020 model year, with a diesel unit now the only option down under. But then there's the GX model that I have here, and this is a really interesting spec for the LandCruiser to come in because it's totally different to what I'm sure most of you are used to. Gone is all the usual chrome and other bling on the outside of the 200 most are familiar with, and instead you'll find the grille, mirror caps and door handles are simply made of black plastic. The LED headlights are gone too, as are the side steps and usual alloy wheels, with smaller and tougher steel units now in their place, and the typical split folding tailgate now makes way for asymmetrical rear barn doors. The typically optional snorkel is added as standard, however, which indicates this base variant's off-roading focus. Inside, there are further traces of that, with the removal of the carpets to make way for what would be cliché to describe as a hose-out vinyl floor, although the seats, rather oddly, are covered in plush velour. It feels undeniably basic inside though, and in a way that reminds of its decade-plus old origins. There's no trip computer or digital speedo, there's only a generic and very basic infotainment system, there's no dual-zone climate control or buttons on the polyurethane steering wheel, and there's a total lack of any active safety equipment despite its 80 grand price tag. Why have they skimped out so much on the GX then? Well, as far as private buyers are concerned at least, it's so that you can modify it exactly to your tastes, fitting the wheels or rock sliders or aftermarket head unit that you want without throwing anything too valuable in the bin. However, they haven't skimped out under the bonnet, because this thing still packs the same 4.5 litre twin turbocharged V8 that every other LandCruiser now gets here in Australia, and it's also available in the LX as well. This thing is a beast of an engine. 200 kilowatts, 650 newton meters, and if you feel like tuning it, you can get way more than that. People are getting gains of over 30% on these with aftermarket tunes and a little bit of light working. And it's this engine, and indeed the V8 petrol engines available in other markets and the LX 570, that makes talking about the LandCruiser so poignant right now, because it seems like at the moment, every week I'm reading a new report or rumour or opinion piece about the demise of the V8 LandCruiser. Supposedly when the new 300 series model comes out, whenever that will be, there's no official date just yet, but when it comes out, the word is that it's going to be going to V6 power only, either a V6 diesel and or a V6 petrol electric hybrid, something along those lines. And supposedly the 200 series and indeed the V8 LandCruiser as we know it is not long for this world. And so if those rumours are to be believed, this could just be the last chance that I get to drive a V8 LandCruiser and share it with all of you. So I figured it's the perfect opportunity to summarise why this thing is going to go down in the history books. Right, now let's start out on the open road where the 200 series just makes for a perfect long distance cruiser, pardon the pun. I mean, it's just such a relaxing drive on nice, long, straight, high-speed roads. I mean, just sitting at 100 k's an hour right now, the ride, even from these fixed-rate coil springs of the base model, is so smooth. It really does absorb the bumps very adeptly. Of course, with the kinetic suspension of the higher spec models, it gets even more comfortable, but even in base form, it's totally fine. The interior is really roomy as well, which is also ideal for a touring vehicle like this. I mean, the armrests are in exactly the right spot, the steering wheel is a nice size, and the feel of it is nice and relaxed, the steering. And this engine is so undisturbed at high speeds. It just feels relaxed and effortless with the way that it just pulls this 2.7 ton car along. But when you want to put your foot into it though, it's got some power there, that's for sure. I mean, you'd expect that, of course, with a 4.5 litre twin turbo V8, even a diesel one. But man, the torque of this thing is so impressive, and I can only imagine just how brutish this would feel with a tune on it to open it up even more. But of course, I'm not just going to stick to sealed roads with this thing, because in Australia we've got an abundance of unpaved dirt roads, and that's exactly what I'm going to turn down right now. Because it's on roads like this that the LandCruiser comes into its element. I mean, I almost think that the ride quality is better on gravel roads like the one that I'm now on than it is on sealed roads. It doesn't feel quite as busy in the rear end. Of course, it's a live rear axle. It doesn't feel quite as busy. It just glides along even more smoothly than it does on bitumen. Oh man, this engine's good. I can see why people are lamenting the potential demise of the V8 LandCruiser, because the V8 just gives it something special. I mean, it's so effortless and undistressed. It's a brilliant engine, this diesel one in particular. Now, a big part of the reason the LandCruiser feels so tractable on dirt roads like this comes down to its four-wheel drive system. It's not a part-time one like you get in many four-wheel drives, it's a full-time one, so it's always driving all four wheels. You can lock the centre differential and you can put it in low range, but right now I've got the diff unlocked and it's in high range, and it's handling loose gravel roads like this absolutely fine. Don't have any traction issues whatsoever. It just feels nice and planted and stable, even when you're on the throttle. Man, it puts that power down well. So well. Now, while there's no particularly challenging terrain near where I am at the moment, I can do a couple of quick little tests just to demonstrate this thing's off-roading ability, although I'm sure if you're watching this you probably already know just how capable these things are. Here's a quick little articulation test though. This will show just how much articulation the rear axle of this thing has. I think we got a little bit of lift off there. The camera will obviously tell the true story though. And then we can try this bit here as well. This is slightly more serious. I'm not going to take the path some particularly lifted off-roaders have taken through there, I'm guessing, but I don't think we actually lifted off through that part. That's really good. Okay, so I did just have a look back over the footage. A tiny little bit of lift off over that first one, but that second big ditch didn't lift off at all as far as I could see. So this thing's really impressive. Next thing I want to try out though is crawl control, which is a feature this thing has, which essentially does the brakes and the throttle all for you when you're off-roading. So all you really need to think about is the steering. It's kind of like an off-road low-speed cruise control. So to activate crawl control, I've turned on low range, Now, you can hear it working away right now. It's a horrendous noise that it makes. This sort of, creaking and groaning. But what it's doing is it's working the throttle and the brake all for me so that I don't have to think about it. My feet aren't on the pedals right now. I'm just using the steering. Now, I do have 5 different speeds I can activate it at. I've just turned it up from the lowest to the second lowest. That's much better. It's not quite as aggressive, but through this big dip here, it's just doing it all for me. That is fantastic. It's essentially driving itself. I'm just turning the wheel. That is fabulous. Take the same thing uphill. Feed in a little bit of throttle from me. Are you going to pull yourself out? I'm not touching the throttle there. That is fantastic. Such a great system. You see, this is why this thing is the king off-road, because it just does it all itself. You don't need to be here. It's driving itself essentially. And of course, what's an off-road video without a quick little splash in the mud? Oh! It's childish, I know. It's very childish, but man, this thing's tough. What a machine. What a machine. If the upcoming 300 series LandCruiser does indeed ditch the V8, it will be disappointing, but I do think that Toyota can make it work. Look at cars like the Land Rover Discovery, for instance, which features a twin-turbo V6 diesel that makes more power than the Bent 8 in this, without feeling at all stressed despite its smaller size. I'm not sure a petrol-electric hybrid would be the right way to go for a vehicle like this if you were planning on overlanding it, but a punchy 6-pot oiler I personally see no issues with. The V8 engine options the 200 series has hosted throughout its life, however, have no doubt been a big part of its charm, and have only enhanced the character of this go-anywhere, do-anything machine. If you're that worried about the V8 disappearing, buy now while you can, and you won't regret it, because the 200 series will go down as one of the all-time greats, and don't doubt that for a second.